Hello BookTube, I'm Jonathan, and in my lifetime, there have been three great rivalries. Pepsi versus Coke, Ronaldo versus Messi, and fantasy versus science fiction. And you guys know, I fight the good fight, the honorable fight, on behalf of Team Sci-Fi. I actually have Sci-Fi is the best fi tattooed both on my chest and my back. That's just how committed I am to the cause. But I've noticed something recently. These two rivals, I think, are on a bit of a collision course because over the last 12 months, or within a 12-month period, because one of these books isn't out yet, I have noticed that there are three cyberpunk books that have been written by fantasy authors. So, like one of these, that's just an interesting oddity. Two of them, maybe that's a coincidence. Three, I think that's a pattern. All right, I think there's a trend here, and I'm going to try and figure out what's going on, why this is happening, and is this a good thing for science fiction? So the three books that I am talking about are All That We See or Seem by Ken Liu, The Last Contract of Isako by Fonda, and Scion by James Islington. So you might have heard of these authors whether you are a sci-fi fan or a fantasy fan, and if you are a fantasy fan, everything I say is in good fun, you are welcome here. But you're probably familiar with these authors either way, because Ken Liu, he wrote the epic fantasy series, The Dandelion Dynasty. I think it is military fantasy, as well as the Paper Menagerie and Other Stories, a successful short story collection, which I believe has a mix of genres in it. I'm going to assume the sci-fi ones are the best ones. And then he also was the translator for two of the three books in the Remembrance of Earth's Past trilogy by Cixin Liu. The Three-Body Problem, you might have seen his name on the front cover. That might be why it sounds familiar. So he's at least dabbled in science fiction before. He has some sci-fi connections. So us sci-fi fans might end up trying to claim him from the fantasy fans. And then we have Fonda, most well known for the Greenbone Saga, an urban fantasy series. And I think she has a couple of other novels that she's written that might be science fiction as well, but her most well-known ones are fantasy. And then lastly, we have James Islington, known for the Lycanius trilogy and the current series. I think two books are out so far, the Hierarchy series, which is kind of all the rage. I've been seeing a lot of hype for this one online. So interesting. In the middle of his fantasy hype, he's decided to dip his toes in the sci-fi waters with some cyberpunk. So I've got a couple of theories for why this has happened. Why are these fantasy authors dabbling in cyberpunk? Well, the first theory that I came up with was that these fantasy authors, right, they're obligated to write 3-book series, 5-book series, 10-book series. When will it end? The fantasy readers, you're so greedy, demanding so many pages from your authors. Whatever happened to the days of a nice, tight 200-page standalone? Well, they can be found in sci-fi. Of course, sci-fi has series as well, but because it tends to be a little bit more concept-driven as opposed to the rich history and world-building and magic systems that goes into a lot of fantasy, which lends itself to exploring over the course of several books. A concept-driven book usually can be explored within a single book. I tend to read more standalones than series. I like both, but most science fiction that I read, or at least over half the science fiction I read, is standalones. So maybe that's what these authors were feeling like doing. They could break the shackles of the fantasy expectations and dive into sci-fi for a quick standalone, and just get an idea out of their head onto the page, and then jump back to what they're doing with fantasy. This wasn't a very good theory because 2 of the 3 are actually book 1 in a series. So that's interesting. They're committing to writing science fiction for more than just one book. All We See or Seem is going to be called the Julia Z or Julia Z for our UK watchers. That is the name of that series. And then Scion, I had to stop to look up what the name of the Scion series is going to be. I don't know, but apparently it is going to be a series, even if it doesn't have a name yet, although I've read that it's not necessarily a continuous series. Each of the books can be read individually, somewhat standalone books within the same universe, I think is James Islington's plan. So I'm just going to call it the Scion series. But either way, 2 of the 3 are series. They are not standalones. Theory number 1, busted. All right, theory number 2. And this comes from the fact that often when science fiction and fantasy meet, maybe in sci-fantasy, a hybrid of genres within the one book, they tend to be more soft science fiction stories. Fantasy is often drawn towards character first stories, exploring themes and worlds, as opposed to the concept driven, especially the hard sci fi, concept driven stories of hard sci fi. It's more soft sci fi that kind of blends well with fantasy. And so perhaps these fantasy authors have a story that they want to tell, but the mechanism or the jumping off point is perhaps more scientific than fantastical, but it's not a hard sci-fi story. It's kind of still in that world, playing to their strengths of their character writing, exploring these themes and such that they have worked on and developed and honed in their fantasy material. And I think this is something that can be achieved in cyberpunk. There is some hard sci-fi cyberpunk, but cyberpunk usually relies more on a vibe and an aesthetic. It's more about these kind of low-life characters, yes, in a high-tech world, but how much is the tech, the descriptions of that tech, really driving your favorite cyberpunk novels? Like, there's some cool details and world building in Neuromancer, but I wouldn't describe Neuromancer as a hard sci-fi novel. So maybe it's kind of a fun subgenre for fantasy authors to play in within the realm of sci-fi that is going to play to their strengths. Well, I don't really think this theory holds up either, because apparently Ken Liu writes hard sci-fi, and I haven't read any of his books other than the translations of his For the Remembrance of Earth's Past, which is a hard sci-fi series, so let me know if you think that is true in the comments. But even if it wasn't true, I think these authors would be capable of doing so if that's what they wanted to pursue. Maybe it wouldn't be as hard a level of sci-fi as something written by Greg Egan, a person that has dedicated a large portion of his life to mathematics and physics. It might not be that hard on the hard sci-fi scale, but if they had an idea that they wanted to pursue that was rooted a little bit more in hard sci-fi concepts, I'm sure they could do the research. I'm sure they could pull it off. These are all smart and capable authors, which they have shown with their success with their existing books. So, theory number 2, also busted. So let's move on to theory number 3, and this one's a little more sinister. Could this be a fantasy Trojan horse? Are these fantasy authors coming into sci-fi, writing a sci-fi book, not with the intention of becoming science fiction writers, but luring science fiction readers over to their side? Unsuspecting science fiction readers read the book, they like it, they go, oh, this author, Fonda Lee, Ken Liu, James Islington, they're really good. Let me check out some of their other books. And those other books are fantasy books. They're stealing science fiction readers and converting them to team fantasy. And I'll be honest, guys, I don't love this. But here's the thing. Here's why I'm not too worried. I think we have the opportunity to reverse Trojan horse them. Here's what I mean. So if these authors, these fantasy authors, write a science fiction book, their existing readers, fantasy readers, are going to check them out. They go, I like this author. I'm going to read their new book. They read it. They find out it's science fiction. They really like it. They go, I want more of this. And those fantasy readers, they turn into science fiction readers. We steal them right back. Okay, so there's going to be a bit of a push and pull here, but I have faith that in the war of ideas, in the war of genres, sci-fi is going to come out on top. So theory number 3, I don't know. I can neither confirm nor deny theory number 3. Let me know who you think is going to come out on top. Is this going to pull more sci-fi readers towards fantasy or more fantasy readers towards sci-fi? And that brings us to theory number 4. And that is, people can be more than one thing. There are plenty of great science fiction authors that have written in a number of genres, whether it's Ursula K. Le Guin, Dan Simmons, Kurt Vonnegut, Stephen King. You can write fantasy, science fiction, horror, literary fiction, whatever it is you want to write. If you are passionate about it and you are a talented writer, I think there is a pretty good chance that you are going to be able to pull this off. And I do think people like to put people in boxes. I have a personal example of this, a very silly, low-stakes one, and that is I was doing a live stream, and somebody in the chat asked a question about sports, and I answered it. And then I got all these comments being amazed that I knew things about sports, because I have a sci-fi channel. I talk about sci-fi. That's all people know me for. As if I can't have other interests, as if I haven't been watching the World Cup or Wimbledon, or Formula One, or baseball, or whatever it is, all just within the past 7 days, I can enjoy sports and know ball. I know sci-fi, but I also know ball, all right? It's possible, you guys, and it's possible that these authors, they know fantasy. We'll see if they also know sci-fi. So that brings us to the all-important question, am I going to read any of these books? Well, let's quickly go through them, what they're about, and see if any of these pique my interest and whether I am going to give these fantasy authors a try. So the premise for All That We See or Seem is that an orphan hacker gets pulled into the case of a kidnapping. The person has been kidnapped, and she has to use her hacking skills in order to unravel what seems to be a virtual reality mystery. So this is kind of an intriguing premise. I do like the Remembrance of Earth's Past trilogy. Not Ken Liu's work, but he translated them. So I'm giving him a little bit of credit for that because that is one of my favorite sci-fi series. And there's supposed to be a bit of hard sci-fi in here, which I do find intriguing. It is, however, the first book in a series, which makes me a little bit less excited to commit to it because it's a longer journey. So if you've read this one, let me know if the first one has a kind of satisfying arc, whether you can pick up book one, enjoy it, and then decide whether you want to continue without being forced to continue with it, like ending on a cliffhanger or something like that. And also, the reviews I've seen for this one so far have been a little bit mixed. So if you have read it, do me a favor, drop a little review in the comments without spoilers, and let me know whether you think I should read it. And then up next, we have The Last Contract of Isako, where we have a character who is a legendary swordsman, and she lives on an ice planet, and she gets sucked in to doing one last final mission, thrusting her into a case of corporate espionage. So this sounds a little bit tropey, but I don't mind that if the tropes are executed well. Fonda Lee has a reputation for being a great character writer, so I'm sure I'll want to go on this journey with this swordsman, and I believe this has been kind of, well, I'm sure there's lots of inspirations for this, but one of them is June, except instead of it being a sand planet, it's an ice planet. So I'm looking forward to kind of diving into the world building, see how well she pulls that off, as well as this kind of cool character journey with kick-ass swordsman. And I think there's a lot of martial arts involved. Some of you may or may not know that I trained Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for 12 years. I'll throw up a quick picture as proof. So I'm always interested to see how martial arts are incorporated into a story. Sometimes it rings true, sometimes it's authentic and it feels exciting, sometimes not so much. But I believe Fonda Lee can pull it off because apparently she herself is an experienced martial artist. And our third and final book, Scion, has been described as John Wick meets Ghost in the Shell. And I like John Wick, and I love Ghost in the Shell, so we're off to a good start. I believe this takes place in a cyberpunk world, and our main character is an assassin, a hitman, and they get given a hit to perform. There's something a little strange, there's something a little off about this one. So again, this is a series, but I think, as I mentioned earlier, I've read that they kind of hold up as standalones. So that's attractive. And I think this one is the shortest one on the list. I think the others were about 400 or 500 pages. This one's only about 250. So a fun little adventure. I can test it out, see if I enjoy it, and then maybe read some of the others. Also, James Islington is Australian. So I gotta show some Australian love. Am I going to put him up there with my favorite Australian sci-fi authors like Greg Egan and T.R. Napa? Hopefully. I would love to find another great sci-fi author from the land down under. So here's what I'm going to do, because I might get to all of these eventually, but there are a lot of sci-fi books I want to read. There are probably over 100 books that I'm really excited to read, so it's hard to get bumped to the top of that list. You have to really stand out in order for me to push you to the top of that list, to the top of my reading schedule. So what I want you guys to do is vote on these 3 books. You guys probably won't have read Scion yet unless you got an advanced reader copy, as that one comes out in September, but it still has a chance. If the premise sounds good enough of you guys will vote for it, and it'll be the winner anyway. So whichever of these 3 books gets the most votes in the comments, I will bump to the top of my list. I'll probably get to the other 2 eventually, but for you guys, I will make the winner a priority. So I just had to cut quickly there for a moment. There are some kids screaming outside. I can only assume because their parents were forcing them to read fantasy books. So anyway, that is the video. Fantasy authors trying out Cyberpunk. Who would have thought it? I'm going to try one of these books based on your comments, your votes, and I'm also going to be reading another book as determined by my patrons. Yes, it's time to spin the quantum wheel in order to find out what book is going to be the patron pick for the month of July. Welcome to the quantum wheel, where all of the patron picks are both simultaneously picked and not picked until we observe a winner. Let's find out what I'll be reading in the month of July. If this is another cyberpunk book written by a fantasy author, there is definitely a glitch in the simulation. All right, it's kind of lagging a little bit. I don't know what the result's going to be. It looks like Hot House. There you go, Hot House by Brian Aldiss. Okay, so this is interesting because I read Nonstop by Brian Aldiss and I really liked it. And then I went and picked up Hot House because I wanted to read that next. And all the comments were like, this book sucks, don't read Hot House. And then I said this in a video and all the comments were like, Hot House is great, ignore those comments. So I have no idea what to think about Hot House, other than I'm going to read it in the month of July. Read it along with me. You might love it, you might hate it. Either way, join the read along. So there you go, that is today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, smash or just gently click the subscribe button. And if you really enjoyed it, consider checking out the perks of becoming a Patreon member, where you can become one of my robots, androids, or cyborgs, like Nima and New Eden, Half-Ogre, Zakawe, Samil, Colin, and the genreless Bamsis. And you can find more sci-fi content over here.